My groom humiliated me in front of his coworkers and dumped me in the middle of dinner, then left me with the check. As he walked away, he shouted loud enough for the whole restaurant to hear, "A girl like you should feel lucky I even gave you a chance." I just smiled and sat there trying to hold it together. This morning, my phone lit up with 14 missed calls. Honestly, I'm still in shock about everything that happened last weekend. I keep replaying it over and over, wondering if I dreamt it or made it worse in my head somehow. But no, my maxed out credit card and the melted cookie dough ice cream on my couch confirm it was painfully real. For some background, I had been with Brandon for nearly 2 years. 2 years, not just some casual thing. We had our rhythm, Saturday movie nights, awkward Thanksgivings with both families, even that ridiculous acro yoga class he convinced me to take, which was a disaster from day one. Things weren't perfect. What relationship is? But I thought we were strong. We had even discussed maybe moving in together by the end of the year. Sure, he had his annoying quirks. His socks seemed to migrate to every corner of the apartment. He texted nonstop during any movie, and he constantly gave these helpful remarks about my appearance, like, "That top makes your arms look kind of big," or "Have you ever tried bangs?" I told myself he was just being honest, but deep down, I was just making excuses. Anyway, last Friday, Brandon messaged me about a dinner with some colleagues. He had never brought me into his professional world before. He always said it was better to keep things separate, so I was genuinely excited. I splurged on a new dress I couldn't really afford, did a full glam session with tutorials and everything, even used my high-end curling wand I saved for weddings and interviews. The dinner was at one of those sleek, overpriced places downtown. You know, tiny plates, dim lighting, and not a single price on the menu. Red flag number 1. When I arrived, Brandon was already seated with 2 guys he works with, Marcus and Theo. The second I approached the table, I could tell something was off. Brandon barely looked up, gave me this half-hearted, "You're late," and didn't even stand all the way. I was literally 2 minutes late, because downtown parking is a nightmare. I sat down, and he immediately looked me over and said, "Oh, you wore that?" And not in a whisper either. Loud enough that Marcus and Theo exchanged glances, and I felt my cheeks turn red instantly. For context, I was wearing a navy blue dress that I thought looked elegant. Simple, tasteful, nothing flashy or inappropriate. I tried to brush it off with a joke, like, "Was there a dress code I missed?" But Brandon just shrugged and said they'd already ordered appetizers. Great. For the next hour, he dominated the conversation with endless work talk that made 0 sense to me, while his friends nodded along and barely acknowledged anything I said. Whenever I did try to contribute, Brandon would either talk over me or correct me like I had no idea what I was saying. At one point, I mentioned a story about a customer from the store where I work, and he cut in with this smug little laugh, saying, "She doesn't really understand how things work in the real business world," complete with a dismissive hand wave. Like managing a retail team for 3 years somehow doesn't count as a real job. I sat there sinking lower in my seat, trying to figure out if Brandon had always been this belittling and I just hadn't noticed, or if he was trying to impress his coworkers by acting like a jerk. Either way, it was humiliating. Then Marcus asked how we met, and I began to share the actual story, how his colleague Julia is one of my closest friends and had introduced us. But before I could even finish the sentence, Brandon jumped in and said, "Yeah, Julia felt sorry for her. I was doing a favor, really," and then laughed like it was some hilarious punchline. My stomach dropped so hard I thought I might be sick. That's not even remotely how it happened. Julia had warned me about Brandon's ego, but told me he had a good heart once you got to know him. Spoiler, she was wrong. I excused myself to the restroom mostly to avoid breaking down at the table. Once inside a stall, I fired off a text to Julia like, "WTF is going on right now?" And while I was still staring at my screen, I got a notification. Brandon had just tagged himself at the restaurant on Instagram. The caption? "Boys' night out," as if I wasn't even there. Julia called immediately, but I let it go to voicemail. I didn't want anyone hearing me cry. I splashed cold water on my face, touched up my makeup, and gave myself a pathetic little pep talk in the mirror about staying strong and finishing dinner with some self-respect. When I returned to the table, they were all laughing about something, but they stopped cold the moment I sat down. Classic. He also made a couple of hilariously obvious fake Instagram accounts to message me, like, painfully obvious. One of them said, "You're making a big mistake," with "you're spelled wrong," which sealed the deal. Blocked instantly. The weirdest part? I ran into him at Target about a month after everything went down. I was browsing shower curtains in the home section, totally minding my business, and there he was, holding a pack of socks and looking like he hadn't slept in a week. We locked eyes for a split second, and I braced myself for a scene. But instead, he just turned around and walked away, leaving his half-full basket abandoned in the aisle. That was 3 months ago. According to Tina, who still sends me holiday cards, which is both sweet and awkward, Brandon eventually moved out of their house and into his uncle's place in another state. His social media has gone completely dark. Kayla thinks his parents finally cut him off financially until he gets into therapy. As for me, I'm actually doing pretty well. My apartment finally feels like mine again. I rearranged the furniture, replaced everything that reminded me of Brandon, and burned every last candle he ever gave me. The most unexpected twist of all this, my friendship with Cody. We're not dating, despite Vanessa's constant matchmaking efforts, but we text often, meet up for lunch, and share dumb TikTok videos. It's comforting to have someone who saw it all unfold and gets why I now have trust issues the size of Texas. Looking back, I'm not even angry anymore. Well, not just angry. I'm also strangely grateful. Not for the relationship, definitely not that, but for the clarity. For seeing who he truly was before I moved in with him or committed to something deeper. Because if I'd found out after that, whew, I don't even want to think about it. If it hadn't been so stressful, it honestly would have been hilarious. Like, how do you even explain this to someone outside the situation? Yeah, my ex made up a fake job, dumped me at dinner, posted my address online, and now his family and co-workers are here planning damage control over croissants. Cody mentioned that their boss had already caught wind of Brandon's online meltdown. Someone had screenshotted and forwarded it to HR, so Monday at work was definitely going to be dramatic. Kayla was visibly worried that if Brandon did lose his job, he might spiral even harder. And that's when the doorbell rang again. This time, it was the building manager. He looked nervous, clutching his clipboard like it was a shield. Apparently, Brandon had been downstairs in the lobby throwing a full-blown tantrum, demanding to be led up to my apartment. The building manager, absolute hero, refused and threatened to call the police if he didn't leave. That's when Brandon stormed out, but not before shouting, "She's a lying bitch!" loud enough for the entire first floor to hear. Tina looked absolutely crushed. She kept repeating how sorry she was, saying she didn't know where they'd gone wrong with him. It was heartbreaking. I could see it on her face. She wasn't just embarrassed, she was genuinely grieving the realization that her adult son had become a walking, talking red flag. Kayla, ever the practical one, suggested I start documenting everything, just in case things escalated. She wasn't wrong. We were sitting there trying to figure out what to do next when my phone buzzed with a notification. Against all better judgment, and everyone in the room telling me not to, I opened it. Brandon had tagged me in an Instagram story. It was an old photo of me from early in our relationship, asleep on his couch with my mouth open. The caption read, "This perfect?" The girl who ruined my birthday isn't so perfect. A girl like her should be grateful anyone took pictures of her at all. And honestly, I laughed. Like, really laughed. Tina looked startled at first, but I couldn't help it. That was his big revenge? A 2-year-old, slightly unflattering photo? That was the best he could come up with? If that was the worst he had, I knew I was going to be just fine. Just as we were discussing next steps, there was a sudden, loud pounding on my door. We all jumped. Then came Brandon's voice, slurred and desperate. "I know you're in there. Open the door." Cody immediately stood up like he was ready to handle him, which was sweet but unnecessary. I was already calling the building's security. Perks of paying a little more in rent. I had on-site backup. Brandon kept yelling, pounding, even trying to jiggle the doorknob. I could hear my neighbor's door creak open as she peeked out, clearly trying to figure out what the hell was going on. Then came the kicks, full-on kicking my door. When security arrived, they didn't waste time. The guard told Brandon to leave or the police would be called. There was some yelling, back and forth I couldn't quite hear, then finally, silence. The guard knocked gently and let me know Brandon had left the building, but he was still hanging around in the parking lot. Tina, utterly mortified, insisted on going down to deal with him herself. Honestly, I didn't argue. She needed to see it. Ralph, Brandon's dad, ended up having to come pick them both up. The whole thing had become too sad to even feel angry about anymore. After they left, Cody and I collapsed onto my couch in stunned silence. Finally, he broke it with, "Do you have any alcohol?" which honestly felt like the most appropriate response to the chaos we'd just lived through. We split a bottle of wine I'd been saving for a special occasion, and this definitely qualified. By the time Cody left, it was late afternoon and I was completely drained. Vanessa came over that night and insisted on staying over, just in case Brandon tried anything else. He didn't, thank God. We ordered greasy pizza, watched trashy reality TV, and tried to process the absolute soap opera my life had become. The next few weeks were an adjustment. Brandon was officially fired after failing to show up to work for 3 days and for sending wildly inappropriate emails to multiple coworkers. He moved back in with his parents for a while, something I only know because Kayla and I have stayed in touch. Turns out, she's actually pretty great. We grab coffee every now and then, and she keeps me updated on any major Brandon drama, though thankfully, it's been quieter lately. That doesn't mean he didn't try a few last-ditch efforts to contact me. I got a handful of voicemails ranging from angry rants to weepy apologies to bizarre walk-down memory lane monologues. I saved them all, just in case, but never responded. No one answered at first. Then Ralph, very quietly, said, "We need to have a family discussion about honesty." And that was the moment Brandon lost it. Full-on meltdown. He accused me of turning his family against him, called Cody a traitor, and screamed that everyone was just jealous of his success. What success? The fake job title? The imaginary team? He knocked over his water glass in the process, pointed at me with pure rage, and shouted, "A girl like her should be grateful I even bothered," Tina gasped. Grandma said something that I'm pretty sure was vintage elderly swearing. The entire room fell into stunned silence, like time had paused to watch him completely self-destruct. His sister just shook her head like none of it surprised her in the slightest. I don't know how, but I stayed calm and said, "The only thing I'm grateful for is finally seeing who you really are." Brandon stormed out, slamming the front door so hard that one of Tina's decorative plates crashed to the floor and cracked. And then, weirdly, everything just went still. Peaceful, almost. Tina apologized to me what felt like 50 times. Ralph looked drained, like all the air had left the room. Kayla silently started mopping up the spilled water. Cody gave me an apologetic smile and said he was sorry for how everything had played out, but that he just couldn't sit there and let Brandon lie to everyone's faces anymore. And then, the strangest thing happened. Instead of awkwardly asking me to leave, they invited me to stay for cake. So there we were, Brandon's ex-girlfriend, his coworker, and his entire family sitting around the table, eating birthday cake, without the birthday boy. It should have been the most painfully awkward moment of my life. But somehow, it wasn't. Afterward, I helped Tina clean up in the kitchen. She was still rattled, kept murmuring how she had no idea Brandon had lied about so much. Her voice cracked a few times. You could tell she wasn't just upset about what he'd done to me. She was heartbroken by what that said about the man her son had become. Honestly, I felt bad for her. No parent wants to face the fact that their kid might actually be kind of awful. She asked me softly if there had been signs, and I admitted that, yeah. Looking back, the red flags were there. I'd just chosen to ignore them because I wanted to believe the best in him. When it was time to leave, Ralph pulled me aside by the front door. He thanked me for being honest and apologized for what Brandon had put me through. He looked so defeated, like he was quietly asking himself where they went wrong. I told him the truth, that Brandon made his own decisions and it wasn't on them. Cody offered to walk me to my car. Maybe he sensed I needed a breather, or maybe he needed one too. As we made our way down the driveway, he told me more about what had been going on at work. Brandon had been taking credit for other people's ideas, faking client emails, even lying about project results. He was on his final warning. Any more missteps and he'd be out. And suddenly, it all made sense. Brandon's obsession with looking important, being admired, keeping up appearances, it was all a smokescreen to cover how close he was to losing everything. His entire self-worth was wrapped up in this imaginary version of himself, and the second it cracked, the whole thing came crashing down. For one fleeting moment, I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. I thanked Cody for having my back and drove home feeling emotionally wrung out, but strangely lighter. Like that deep, quiet relief you get when you finally take off an uncomfortable bra at the end of the longest day of your life. Sorry for the weird analogy, but y'all know what I mean, right? That sweet, weirdly sacred moment of just existing in your own space after chaos. When I got home, I had 3 missed calls from Vanessa, clearly desperate for updates. I was just about to call her back when my phone buzzed with a text from Brandon. "You've ruined everything. This isn't over." I didn't reply. I just blocked his number, made myself a cup of tea, and sat on the couch. I should have been shaken or angry or even scared, but honestly, I just felt tired and a little proud of myself for finally standing up to him. I really thought that was the end of it. I wanted it to be the end. But the next morning, my phone lit up like a Christmas tree. 13 missed calls from Brandon's mom, his sister, Cody, and a handful of unknown numbers. My stomach dropped. Something had clearly happened overnight, and judging by the increasingly frantic voicemails, Brandon had completely unraveled. Last update. Okay, I'm finally ready to explain those 13 missed calls. Thanks for bearing with me while I processed everything. And sorry for the delay. My laptop decided to do a surprise 4-hour update right as I sat down to write. Because of course. Cody walked in looking perfectly professional, in a crisp button-down, holding a folder in one hand like he'd just stepped out of a corporate briefing. He apologized for interrupting the birthday dinner, but said he had some urgent documents Brandon needed to sign for Monday morning. Tina, ever the gracious hostess, immediately insisted he stay for cake later. Brandon tried ushering him toward the door like a man trying to stop a train with a toothpick, but Ralph waved it off and said, "Come on, it's just us here. You can handle work stuff at the table. We're all family." Cody took the empty seat I'd deliberately saved next to me. Brandon's jaw clenched so tight I genuinely feared for the integrity of his molars. Then Ralph, trying to make conversation, casually asked Cody how the big presentation had gone. The one Brandon had supposedly led. Cody paused for a beat, clearly confused, but then glanced at me, then at Brandon, and I could practically see the wheels turning in his head as he made a choice. He replied that the presentation went fine, then added, politely but firmly, that their boss had delivered it, and Brandon and the team had provided support. Ralph blinked and said, "That's not what Brandon told us." I couldn't help myself. I leaned forward just a little and asked, "Oh, Cody, while you're here, did Brandon ever mention his big promotion?" Cody looked like he wanted to crawl under the table. He fiddled with his napkin, caught between not wanting to sell out a coworker and not wanting to lie to an entire room full of relatives. He mumbled something about company restructuring, clearly stalling. Brandon jumped in with this forced, wheezy laugh and tried to steer the conversation toward sports or something equally bland, but Kayla shut that down real quick. She tilted her head and asked, "Cody, what's Brandon's actual job title?" The silence that followed was deafening, like the kind of silence that happens in a public restroom when you drop something and everyone hears it, but no one says a word. Cody looked at Brandon, who was practically begging with his eyes, then at me. I gave him the tiniest nod. He swallowed, cleared his throat, and said, "Brandon is an administrative assistant in the marketing department." Forks paused midair. Ralph set his down, slowly. Tina blinked. Grandma let out this soft, confused, "Oh," and Kayla, under her breath, muttered something that sounded suspiciously like, "I knew it." And just like that, the dam burst. Brandon immediately jumped into full spin mode, insisting Cody was misinformed, that his title was fluid, that he had multiple responsibilities, and it's all very nuanced. But no one was buying it anymore. His family started asking pointed questions, ones Brandon couldn't wriggle his way out of. "When exactly did you get promoted?" He hadn't. "Why did you say you had a team working under you?" He didn't. "And what about that corner office you mentioned last month?" Also completely fictional. With every question, his elaborate web of lies began to fall apart thread by thread. He kept glancing at me like this was somehow my fault, like I'd orchestrated the downfall of his imaginary empire. And honestly, that just made me even more determined to let the truth come out. Tina, bless her, tried to smooth things over by suggesting we all have some cake and shift to happier topics. She got up and went to the kitchen, clearly overwhelmed. That's when Kayla turned to me and asked, dead serious, "What happened at that restaurant you mentioned earlier?" I took a deep breath. This was it, my moment. So I told them everything. How Brandon had invited me to dinner with his coworkers, how he mocked me in front of them, how he dumped me in the middle of the meal, then walked out and left me to cover a $347 bill I couldn't even afford. How he said, loud enough for the entire restaurant to hear, "A girl like you should be grateful I even dated you." Brandon kept trying to interrupt, but Ralph shut him down with a look that could freeze fire. I'd never seen that expression on him before, just quiet, cold disappointment. Brandon tried spinning it, saying I was exaggerating, that I'd embarrassed him in front of his colleagues by not fitting in, and that leaving me with the check was his way of teaching me financial responsibility. I swear, his grandma snorted out loud at that one. That's when Cody, who'd been respectfully quiet for most of this, finally spoke up. He confirmed everything. Then, calmly and professionally, he said he'd actually overheard Brandon bragging about how he'd put me in my place after the dinner. He even pulled out his phone and showed everyone texts from Theo, literally laughing about it with Brandon afterward. Receipts, y'all. Right then, Tina came back into the room carrying the birthday cake. She placed it gently on the table, glanced around at the tension, and asked, "Did I miss something?" My phone buzzed. A text from Cody. "On my way, 15 minutes out." Brandon leaned in and hissed, "What are you doing here?" I thought after the restaurant. I turned to him with a smile so saccharine it could have sweetened the iced tea and said, loud enough for the whole table to hear, "Oh, I wouldn't miss the chance to tell your family what happened at that restaurant, Brandon. I think they'd love to hear it." His face drained of what little color was left, just as Tina started placing the first dishes on the table. That look, pure, unfiltered panic, made every sleepless night and second-guessing moment worth it. Game on. Second update. Okay, I'm finally ready to share what happened at Brandon's birthday dinner. Sorry for the delay. I needed a solid mental health day after all the drama. Plus, my neighbor accidentally borrowed my Wi-Fi and apparently downloaded the entire internet, so that didn't help. But where were we? Right, me, sitting at the dinner table with Brandon's entire family while he tried not to visibly unravel. So there I was, across from Tina and Ralph, with Kayla on my left, Grandma to my right, and two cousins whose names I still mix up despite knowing them for almost 2 years. The table was packed with Tina's legendary pot roast, creamy mashed potatoes that could make you cry, and some artisan salad that everyone politely pretended to like, but clearly had no plans to eat. The first 20 minutes were textbook awkward. Brandon kept hijacking the conversation, steering it away from anything remotely personal, while throwing me dagger-eyed glances like I was a live grenade at the table. I just kept smiling and passing the bread rolls, thoroughly enjoying the tiny twitch that developed under his left eye every time I opened my mouth. Was it petty? Maybe. Was it unbelievably satisfying? Absolutely. Tina, being the saint she is, tried to keep things upbeat with light small talk, asking about my job, how my parents were doing, all that, and I answered every question with poise, and just enough sparkle to keep Brandon sweating bullets. When Tina mentioned how proud they all were of Brandon's big promotion, I almost spit out my water. I turned to look at him, and sure enough, his face had gone the exact shade of the pickled beets on the table. Without missing a beat, he launched into this grand speech about how his team was crushing their quarterly targets, and how his boss was practically grooming him for a senior leadership role. I just smiled and nodded, watching him weave lie after lie like he was auditioning for a role in corporate Fantasyland. Then Ralph, who's usually the strong and silent type, chimed in with a question about the Johnson account. Apparently, Brandon had been bragging to his dad about some massive deal he was supposedly spearheading. His response was so vague it could have doubled as a daily horoscope. Something about strategic pivots and leveraging core competencies. Translation: complete nonsense. Across the table, Kayla caught my eye. She's always been the no BS sibling, the one who Googles statistics mid-argument just to prove a point. She raised an eyebrow at me like, is he serious right now? Then Tina, in full mom mode, started talking about the future. She looked between us and asked if our big news had anything to do with us taking the next step. Brandon nearly dropped his fork and muttered something about it not being the right time to discuss that. His grandma, who has zero filter and is hands down my favorite person at that table, cut in and said, "So, are you two moving in together or what? Brandon said you were apartment hunting." News to me. The closest we'd ever gotten to that was me joking about how we should probably combine our Netflix accounts to save money. Meanwhile, Brandon was back to trying to reclaim the spotlight, rambling about how his boss had recently given him a company card for business expenses. I couldn't resist. I tilted my head and asked sweetly, "Oh, what kind of expenses are you authorized for?" He fumbled through something about client dinners and team outings, avoiding eye contact like it was radioactive. That's when I went in for the soft kill. "Oh, speaking of dinners," I said casually, turning toward Tina. "Brandon took me to the most amazing place last week. What was it called again, honey? The one where you met up with Marcus and Theo?" The way the color drained from his face, faster than my phone battery when I'm scrolling TikTok for too long. Seriously, my phone can't survive more than 20 minutes of TikTok before gasping for battery life. Anyone else? Anyway, before Brandon could stammer out a response to my little dinner jab, the doorbell rang. Perfect timing. Tina got up to answer it, and I heard her cheerful voice call out, "Oh, Cody, what a surprise." I swear Brandon looked like he might actually faint. Cody groaned because he already had plans. And that's when inspiration struck. What if Cody had to drop something off at Brandon's parents' house right around the time of the birthday dinner? The timing would be perfect. As we started planning out the logistics, my phone buzzed. A message from Brandon, the first one since that train wreck of a night at the restaurant. It read, "We need to talk about what happened. I might have overreacted." Might have? I showed the text to Cody, and he nearly spit out his cold brew. "Overreacted is when you roll your eyes at someone being late," he said. "Not when you publicly trash your girlfriend and leave her with a $340 bill." I didn't reply. Let him stew in it. The next 2 days were a whirlwind of prep. If I was walking into that dinner, I wasn't going empty-handed. I combed through old texts and screenshots, matching up dates when Brandon said he was at work, with photos of him out with friends, fake conferences, non-existent coworkers, even LinkedIn posts that Cody confirmed were total fiction. It was all there. Every thread of the lies he'd spun over 2 years. And I was ready to let it unravel exactly where it needed to, in front of the people he'd been lying to the most. The photos he'd posted at work, just generic shots he'd pulled from the company website, nothing was real. By Friday night, Julia came over to help me figure out what to wear. I'd be lying if I said a part of me didn't want to show up looking drop-dead gorgeous just to make Brandon squirm. But in the end, we decided the best move was to look effortlessly put together, not like I was trying to make a scene. We chose a simple black dress, one that Brandon once called plain in one of his classic backhanded compliments. Funny thing, I always got compliments when I wore it. Now I realize he was probably trying to keep me from feeling confident on purpose. I barely slept that night. My mind ran through every worst-case scenario. What if this completely backfired? What if his family believed him? What if I froze up and couldn't go through with it? By the time Saturday morning rolled around, I had chewed my nails down to the skin and mentally rehearsed 17 different versions of how the evening might go. Around noon, Brandon texted again. "Can't wait to see you tonight. Wear something nice. My parents are excited." I didn't respond. Let him keep pretending. I spent the afternoon getting ready with this strange mix of anxiety and quiet determination. Julia helped me with my hair while giving me one last pep talk, holding me steady as I fought the urge to back out. At 5:30, I got in the car. I had to pull over 5 minutes in because my hands were shaking too much to hold the wheel. I sat on the shoulder, took a few deep breaths, those ones from the meditation app I downloaded months ago and never used, and stared at the steering wheel. Was I out of my mind? Should I just block Brandon on everything and move on like a rational adult? But then, I pictured him sitting at that dinner table, spinning more of his fantasy stories, painting himself as the poor guy who had to break things off with the clingy girlfriend, and my spine straightened. I wasn't doing this for revenge, I was doing it for the truth. I pulled up to his parents' house at 6:15, fashionably late. I knew that would irritate him. The driveway was already packed with cars, looked like the entire extended family had shown up. I checked my lipstick in the mirror, took one last breath, and walked up to the door. His dad opened it, smiling warmly like always, and gave me a big hug. The smell of Tina's pot roast hit me like a wave of nostalgia, and for a brief moment, I felt an unexpected sting of sadness. I really did like his family, and I knew this would probably be the last time I'd ever see them. I turned the corner into the living room, and there was Brandon, drink in hand, mid-laugh at something his cousin had said. He froze, completely. His eyes locked on me, and the color drained from his face. That split second was everything. Panic flickered across his expression before he plastered on a fake smile and walked toward me. He gave me a stiff hug and leaned in, whispering, "You actually came. We need to talk. Privately," Brandon muttered, his voice tight with panic. I just smiled sweetly and, loud enough for everyone to hear, replied, "I wouldn't miss your birthday for anything, especially since you told everyone we had big news to share." His face went pale. Tina clapped her hands in delight and said, "Oh my gosh, is this what I think it is?" His sister Kayla shot me a sly grin, and his dad started cracking jokes about finally getting grandkids. Brandon tightened his grip on my elbow and tried to steer me toward the hallway, but just then his mom called out that dinner was ready and told everyone to take their seats. I slid into my spot at the table while Brandon hovered, eyes darting between me and every family member, clearly on edge. After Cody confirmed that Brandon had been spinning lies about his career for years, I pretty much collapsed into that post-breakup haze we all know too well. Crying into a pint of ice cream one minute, rage scrolling through old selfies the next, wondering if any of it had ever been real. My apartment looked like a scene from a disaster movie. Dirty dishes in the sink, laundry covering the floor, and at least 7 empty takeout bags scattered across the counter because cooking felt like climbing a mountain. The hardest part wasn't even the breakup itself. It was the random moments throughout the day when something funny would pop into my head and I'd instinctively go to text Brandon, only to remember everything that happened. It was like getting dumped all over again every single time. My brain kept looping. Did that really happen? How did I miss every sign? I avoided social media like the plague because I knew he'd post something obnoxious. But by Wednesday morning, curiosity won, and I checked Instagram. And there it was, Brandon at the gym, flexing in the mirror with some ridiculous caption like, "Level up, know your worth, stay bold." I almost threw my phone across the room. That night, Julia came over with Thai food and found me cocooned in my comforter like a sad, emotionally exhausted burrito. She's honestly been a saint through all this, making sure I eat real food, letting me rant about the same things over and over, and never once saying, "I told you so," even though she totally could have. While we were eating, she showed me her text thread with Cody. Apparently, the two of them had been chatting a lot, and Cody had some serious tea. According to him, Brandon had been telling everyone at the office that he dumped me because I was clingy and obsessed with marriage. I nearly choked. Me? Clingy? This is the same guy who had a Pinterest board called Dreamhouse Vibes, which he swore was for a client branding project. Yeah, right. But then Cody dropped a real bomb. Brandon wasn't just lying about his job title. He was actually on probation at work for stealing credit on a major team project and could be fired any day now. Those supposed late nights at the office? He was scrambling to cover his own screw-ups before anyone higher up noticed. Those business trips? Total fantasy. I was still reeling from all of that when my phone rang. It was Tina, Brandon's mom. I almost didn't pick up. It felt awkward, but she's always been genuinely kind to me, remembered my birthday, asked about my job, sent holiday cards, the whole deal. So I answered. She sounded worried and asked if everything was okay between Brandon and me. Apparently, he'd told his family we'd had a small argument, but we're working through it. A small argument. This man humiliated me in public, dumped me in front of his coworkers, left me with a $342 dinner bill, and ghosted me like I was nothing. I tried to keep it vague. I didn't want to drag her into the mess, so I told her we were taking some space. That's when she mentioned Brandon's birthday dinner on Saturday and how the whole family was looking forward to seeing me there. I swear, I nearly choked on my lo mein. Brandon had told his entire family that we were still together, and that I was coming to celebrate his birthday. The dinner was going to be at his parents' house, and apparently, Brandon had told them we had some big news to share. After I hung up the phone, I just sat there, completely stunned, while Julia stared at me like I'd just grown a second head. "Is he delusional or just a pathological liar?" she asked. Honestly, I didn't know anymore. I was wondering the exact same thing. That's when the idea came together. I wasn't going to that dinner to cause drama. His family had always been lovely to me, and they deserved to know the truth about who he really was. But I also wasn't going to yell or be petty. I'd just show up as invited, and let the truth reveal itself. Quietly. Naturally. The next day, Cody and I met for coffee. It was a little awkward at first, since our only connection was through Brandon, but Cody turned out to be super easygoing and refreshingly honest. He confirmed everything, and then some. Apparently, that team Brandon claimed to lead, it was just him and 2 interns. That big company presentation he boasted about, he was literally just advancing the slides while his manager did the talking. Cody even admitted he always thought Brandon's stories about me didn't add up. According to him, Brandon would come into work griping about how I was too demanding, too emotional, when in reality, I was the one covering most of our dates toward the end, since Brandon kept claiming to be between paychecks, which, in hindsight, probably just meant he had no idea how to manage money. Halfway through our chat, Cody got a text from their manager asking if he could help out Saturday evening with an urgent last-minute project. Then the waiter brought our entrees, and Brandon zeroed in on my meal like a heat-seeking missile. I'd ordered pasta, one of the cheaper dishes, because I was already worried about the cost, and he started making these snide comments like, carb loading for a marathon, and bold choice for someone with that body type. Every little jab felt like a paper cut, and they just kept coming. I could barely eat. I pushed my food around with my fork, counting down the seconds until I could leave without totally losing it. Then Theo asked Brandon about a big pitch he'd recently given at work, and Brandon launched into this exaggerated story about how his boss was blown away by his ideas and had basically handed him control of the whole project. That's when something in my brain snapped. Just a week earlier, Brandon had been pacing around our apartment, stressing over that exact same presentation, saying his part was only 5 minutes long and he was terrified he'd mess it up. Now suddenly he's the star of the show. It was like he was rewriting reality in real time, painting himself as some kind of corporate hero. And then the check came. The waiter gently placed it on the table, and Brandon picked it up, glanced at it for a second, and then casually slid it in front of me. I thought he was just showing me the total. But then he said something I will never forget. You know what? I don't think this is working. I just stared at him, waiting for him to laugh or say he was kidding. He didn't. I've been trying, he said, but I'm just not attracted to you anymore. I think we should break up. Right there, in a crowded restaurant, in front of his coworkers, after nearly 2 years together. Who does that? I was frozen, completely blindsided. Are you serious right now? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. This is how you want to do this? He stood up, pulled on his jacket, and added the final dagger to my already crushed heart. A girl like you should feel lucky I even dated you this long. You're not exactly a prize. Then he walked out, laughing, with Marcus and Theo right behind him. I was left sitting there, stunned, with a $342 bill in front of me for their overpriced Wagyu starters and $20 cocktails. The waiter gave me this gentle, pitying look that made the whole thing feel even worse. I handed over my credit card, the same one I was still paying off from the holidays, and somehow managed to hold myself together until I reached the parking lot. That's where I lost it. I called Julia, sobbing so hard she couldn't even make out what I was saying at first. She didn't hesitate, just said, I'm on my way, and showed up at my apartment 30 minutes later with a bottle of wine and a pint of Ben & Jerry's. She was my hero that night. Between the ugly crying and devouring cookie dough ice cream straight from the tub, I told her everything. She was furious, like pacing around the room and planning vengeance furious. I had to talk her down from driving over to Brandon's place to scream at him on his doorstep. That's when Julia got oddly quiet. She kept circling back to questions about what Brandon had said regarding work, about the project, his position, the promotion he was supposedly up for. Then she finally looked at me and said, Sabrina, I don't know how to tell you this, but Brandon isn't who he says he is at the office. My stomach dropped. Turns out Brandon wasn't some rising star strategist on the verge of a big promotion. He was an assistant, one who grabbed coffee, took notes during meetings, and managed the team's calendar. All those important business trips he bragged about, completely made up. That big presentation he talked about, he was just helping put together the slides. Even the fancy job title on his LinkedIn, total fiction. I felt like the biggest fool. 2 years with someone who fabricated nearly every detail of his professional life, and I never caught on. What else had he lied about? After Julia left that night, I went full FBI mode. I scrolled through months of texts, looked at every photo, every message, and suddenly the red flags were everywhere. Comments about money that didn't make sense. Late nights at work, when his location was showing up across town, weird evasions anytime I asked for specifics. I barely slept. I just kept looping that moment in the restaurant in my head. How worthless he made me feel. How effortlessly he discarded me. Then, around 3 a.m., I got a message from an unknown number. Hey, this is Cody from Brandon's office. Julia gave me your number. There are some things you should know. That was when things really took a turn. First update, thank you all so much for the kindness and support you showed on my last post. I cried reading your messages, like the good kind of cry, the kind that makes you feel less alone. A lot of you asked for an update, so here's what happened next in this absolute whirlwind of chaos.